The gate to my family farm stood wide open, a sight that usually filled me with dread. It meant someone had ignored the prominent, private property and no trespassing signs. My heart pounded as I raced towards the pasture, a knot of worry tightening in my stomach. What I saw next made my jaw drop. There, right in the middle of my prize-winning Longhorns, was Karen's HOA crew. They were strutting around, clipboards in hand, oblivious to the massive, horned beasts that now eyed them with growing interest. Just as I was about to yell, Big Red, my largest bull, let out a low rumble. It wasn't a friendly sound. And that's when the chaos began. The ground literally shook, hooves pounded, and shouts, not from me, but from Karen's crew, filled the air. What on earth had they done to provoke my gentle giants? Growing up in Willow Creek, a small town nestled between rolling hills and a rapidly expanding suburb, meant living a life of quiet rhythms and open spaces. My name is Alex, and my family has owned this farm for generations. Our farm wasn't just land, it was a living legacy, a place where the seasons dictated our days, and the well-being of our animals was our constant priority. My earliest memories are tied to the scent of freshly cut hay, the lowing of cattle, and the comforting creak of the barn door. Life was simple, yet rich with purpose. We believed in hard work, honest living, and the profound importance of community. We always tried to be good neighbors, offering a helping hand whenever someone needed it, whether it was lending a tractor or sharing extra produce from our garden. My parents always taught me that kindness, even to those who seemed to lack it themselves, was a strength, not a weakness. Empathy, my dad would say, is like a flashlight in the dark. It helps you understand what someone else might be going through, even if they're acting tough on the outside. This philosophy was put to the test when the new housing development, Harmony Heights, began to sprout up on the land bordering our eastern fence line. Suddenly, our quiet country road was buzzing with construction vehicles, and the serene hum of nature was replaced by the incessant beeping of machinery. The first few months were a whirlwind of noise and dust, but we understood. Progress, as they say, marches on. We even baked cookies for the construction crew, a small gesture of welcome. Most of them were friendly, waving as they drove by, and some even stopped for a chat, curious about farm life. They were good folks, just doing their jobs. Then came the residents of Harmony Heights, and with them, the Homeowners Association, or HOA. Their arrival brought a different kind of change. It started subtly, with polite inquiries about our farm practices. "Do your cows moo loudly at night?" someone would ask, a strained smile on their face. "Is that really a natural smell?" another would wonder, pinching their nose delicately. We patiently explained about farming, about livestock, about the natural cycle of things. We invited them to see the calves, hoping that a little understanding would bridge the gap. Some were genuinely interested, their eyes lighting up as they petted a young calf or watched us milk a cow. These interactions gave me hope. I thought, perhaps, we could truly live side by side, learning from each other. But then Karen arrived. Karen was, to put it mildly, a force of nature, but not in a pleasant way. She was the self-appointed head of the Harmony Heights HOA's Beautification Committee, and she seemed to view our farm as a blight on her perfectly manicured suburban dream. Her first official visit to our farm was not a friendly one. She marched up to our door, clipboard in hand, a scowl firmly etched on her face. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and crisp white blazer seemed utterly out of place against the rustic backdrop of our farmhouse. "Mr. Peterson," she began, her voice sharp and brittle, "I am Karen Williams, head of the Harmony Heights Beautification Committee. We have received numerous complaints regarding the aesthetic integrity of your property." My dad, bless his patient soul, just nodded slowly. "Alex is my son," he said, gesturing to me. "What seems to be the trouble, Ms. Williams?" Karen gestured vaguely towards our barn. "The rustic nature of your buildings is quite jarring against the modern architecture of Harmony Heights. And frankly, the smell is rather pervasive. I felt my cheeks flush with indignation, but my dad simply smiled. Well, Ms. Williams, this is a working farm. It's meant to be rustic. And as for the smell, that's the smell of honest work and happy animals. Karen wasn't amused. She launched into a lengthy monologue about property values, community standards, and obscure HOA bylaws that seemed to have been conjured from thin air. She complained about the occasional stray chicken, the sound of our tractor, and even the natural dust that rose from our fields on a dry day. It was clear she saw our farm not as a place of life and livelihood, but as an inconvenience, a stubborn obstacle to her vision of suburban perfection. We tried to explain the realities of farming, the deep connection we had to the land, and the vital role our farm played in the local ecosystem and economy. We even offered to plant a row of fast-growing trees along the fence line for more privacy. But Karen wasn't interested in compromise or understanding. She was only interested in control. The visits became more frequent, each one more absurd than the last. She criticized the color of our fence, the placement of our hay bales, and even the height of our sunflowers. My dad, ever the peacekeeper, tried his best to appease her, making minor adjustments where he could without compromising the farm's operations. He truly believed that if we showed enough goodwill, she would eventually see reason. Sometimes, he'd tell me, people are just scared of what they don't understand. If we're patient and kind, maybe they'll learn. It was a valuable lesson, one I tried to internalize, even as Karen's demands became increasingly frustrating. One sweltering afternoon, during the peak of hay season, a delivery truck carrying a fresh load of feed for our cattle got stuck in the mud near our main gate. It was a common occurrence after a heavy rain, and we had a system for dealing with it. Just as I was about to hitch our tractor to the truck, Karen's pristine white SUV pulled up, kicking up a cloud of dust. She rolled down her window, her face a mask of annoyance. "Mr. Peterson. Is there a reason this monstrosity is blocking the road? This is a public thoroughfare, and you are creating a nuisance," she declared, completely ignoring the fact that the truck was clearly marked for our farm and was trying to deliver essential supplies. I tried to explain the situation calmly. "It's a feed delivery, Ms. Williams. We're just trying to get it unstuck." She scoffed. "Well, you should have planned better, shouldn't you? This is completely unacceptable. You're disrupting the flow of traffic for the residents of Harmony Heights." A line of cars had indeed begun to form behind her, their drivers looking equally annoyed. Most of them were new residents, and I could feel their judgmental stares. It was a low point, feeling like an inconvenience on our own property. We managed to free the truck, but the incident only fueled Karen's fire. She saw it as further proof that our farm was a problem that needed to be managed, controlled, and ultimately, removed. The HOA meetings, which we occasionally attended out of a sense of civic duty and a desire to represent our perspective, became arenas for Karen to air her grievances about our farm. She would present doctored photos, exaggerated claims, and even outright fabrications about the unsightly nature of our property and the disruptive sounds and smells. It was disheartening to hear our life's work being described in such a negative light, especially when we put so much effort into being good stewards of the land and good neighbors. Many of the newer residents, easily swayed by Karen's confident, authoritative demeanor, would nod along, never bothering to visit the farm themselves or ask for our side of the story. It felt like an uphill battle, trying to foster understanding when so much misinformation was being spread. One evening, after a particularly draining HOA meeting where Karen had spent 20 minutes complaining about the unbearable stench of manure, which was simply the natural scent of our compost, I felt a deep sense of despair. My dad, seeing my frustration, put a hand on my shoulder. "Son," he said softly, "remember what I told you about empathy. Maybe Karen is just really stressed about her new role, or she's trying to impress someone. It doesn't excuse her behavior, but it helps to remember that everyone has their own struggles. We can only control how we react. We keep doing what's right, and we keep showing kindness. Eventually, the truth will speak for itself. His words were a balm, but the constant pressure, the feeling of being under a microscope, was taking its toll. We continued our farming life, trying our best to ignore the increasingly ridiculous complaints. We installed higher fencing in some areas, planted more shrubs, and even adjusted our work schedule to minimize noise during specific hours, all in an effort to be considerate. We believed in coexistence. We believed in finding common ground. Then came the letters. Official-looking envelopes with the Harmony Heights HOA logo, filled with demands, threats of fines, and bizarre stipulations. They wanted us to repaint our barn a neutral, approved suburban color, which would have cost a fortune and gone against the very grain of our farm's identity. They demanded we install sound barriers, even though our animals were naturally quiet, and the only noise was the occasional happy bleating or lowing. We consulted a lawyer, who advised us that many of their demands were legally unenforceable, as our farm predated the development and was operating within established agricultural zoning laws. Armed with this knowledge, we politely but firmly pushed back, citing the relevant statutes and our rights as long-standing landowners. This seemed to enrage Karen even more. She saw our refusal to comply with her arbitrary rules as a personal affront, a challenge to her authority. The tension escalated steadily, simmering beneath the surface like a slow-burning fire. We knew she was planning something, but we couldn't quite predict what. We doubled down on our security measures, installing more cameras and making sure all gates were securely locked, especially the main one leading to the cattle pastures. We had a healthy herd of Longhorns, known for their calm demeanor but also their immense size and impressive horns. They were gentle giants, but like any animal, they could be unpredictable if startled or threatened. We loved our animals and protected them fiercely. One breezy Tuesday morning, as the sun was just beginning to warm the fields, I was out checking the fence lines. Everything seemed peaceful. The cattle were grazing contentedly, the birds were singing, and the air smelled fresh and earthy. I felt a rare moment of calm. This was our sanctuary, our heritage. And then I saw it. The main gate, the one I had personally triple-checked the night before, was not just open, it was ajar, just enough for a person to slip through. A cold dread washed over me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that something was terribly wrong. I raced towards the pasture, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of the open gate. Had I forgotten to lock it? No, that was impossible. I was meticulous about security. A chilling thought, a dark suspicion, began to form in my mind. And then, as I rounded the corner of the large oak tree that stood sentinel at the edge of the pasture, I saw them. Not one, not two, but a whole group. They were indeed on my land, beyond the fence, in the very pasture where my cattle grazed. It was Karen, of course, leading the charge. With her were two other women from the HOA, all of them wearing those crisp, business-casual outfits that seemed so out of place on a working farm. They looked like they were on a mission, their faces grim and determined, as if they were storming a fortress. They had no clipboards in their hands this time, but instead, one of the women held a measuring tape, and another had a camera. What were they doing? My blood ran cold as I watched them, completely unaware of the massive, horned beasts that were now slowly, curiously, turning their heads in their direction. My cattle, usually unbothered by my presence, were now shifting nervously, their heavy tails flicking. Big Red, our largest bull, a magnificent beast with horns spanning over 6 feet, lowered his head slightly, a deep, guttural sound rumbling in his chest. It was a warning, a sound I knew well. And they were walking straight towards him, completely oblivious. My gut screamed at me to intervene, to yell, to do anything to stop what I knew was about to happen. But before I could even open my mouth, Big Red let out another, louder rumble, a sound that vibrated through the very ground beneath my feet. And that's when it truly began. Big Red's rumble was like a low growl from the earth itself. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical sensation, vibrating through the air and the ground, a clear warning. Karen's crew, engrossed in their mission, barely registered it at first. The woman with the measuring tape was meticulously stretching it across the ground, near a patch of clover, while Karen herself was pointing emphatically at something in the distance. The other woman, camera poised, was about to snap a picture. They were so focused on whatever trivial infraction they were trying to document that they seemed completely deaf to the growing unease in the pasture. My heart was in my throat. I knew my animals. Big Red was usually a gentle giant, a leader of the herd, but he was also incredibly protective of his space and his ladies. His calm demeanor could turn in an instant if he felt threatened, or if his territory was invaded. And these people, with their clipboards and measuring tapes, were not just invading his space, they were acting like they owned it. The other Longhorns, sensing Big Red's agitation, began to shift, their large bodies swaying, their heads lifting to observe the intruders. A few calves, nestled close to their mothers, let out soft, questioning moans. The whole herd was on edge. Suddenly, a younger bull, named Buster, who was notoriously more feisty than Big Red, took a step forward, pawing at the ground. A cloud of dust puffed up around his hooves. This finally caught Karen's attention. She looked up, her eyes narrowing as she saw Buster, then Big Red, and then the rest of the herd staring at them. For a split second, a flicker of something that looked like uncertainty crossed her face. But it was quickly replaced by her usual haughty expression. "Well, look at these unruly beasts," she declared, her voice still sharp, but with a slight tremor of apprehension. She took a step back, pulling the woman with the measuring tape with her. "They clearly need to be contained. This is a public safety hazard." Just as she finished speaking, Big Red let out a thunderous bellow. It wasn't a low rumble this time, it was a full-throated roar that echoed across the pasture. It was a sound that meant business. The ground vibrated with the force of it. And that's when Buster decided to take action. He wasn't charging, not yet, but he took a quick, powerful trot towards them, kicking up more dust. The other Longhorns followed suit, not quite running, but moving with purpose, their massive forms closing in. Karen and her crew finally realized the gravity of their situation. Their faces, which had been so determined moments before, now drained of color. The woman with the camera shrieked, dropping her device. It hit the ground with a sickening thud, the lens shattering. The measuring tape lady gasped, pulling her hands up to her face. Karen herself, for once, was speechless, her mouth agape as she stared at the approaching cattle. Their perfectly manicured suburban shoes, designed for sidewalks and patios, were now sinking slightly into the soft, uneven pasture ground. The picture of absolute panic on their faces was something I would never forget. They spun around, trying to figure out where to run. But in a wide-open pasture, with no trees or structures nearby, there was nowhere to hide. The Longhorns, sensing their fear and their desperate attempts to flee, picked up speed. It wasn't a coordinated attack, but rather a chaotic chase. The sheer size of the animals, their thundering hooves, and their impressive horns were enough to send anyone into a terrified flight. Karen's crew scattered, screaming, their meticulously styled hair and crisp clothes becoming disheveled in an instant. One woman tripped and fell, scrambling to get back up, her arms flailing. Karen, surprisingly agile in her panic, darted towards the fence, attempting to scramble over it. The scene was pure pandemonium, a chaotic dance between panicked humans and very annoyed cattle. I watched, stunned, as my usually placid Longhorns gave chase, not looking to harm, but certainly looking to make their presence known in a very forceful way. The aftermath of the bovine encounter was, predictably, a whirlwind of accusations and outrage from Harmony Heights. Karen, still shaken but seemingly unharmed, managed to call the sheriff's department, demanding immediate action against my vicious animals, and me, the irresponsible farmer. The sheriff, a good-natured man named Officer Miller who had known my family for years, arrived at the farm an hour later, looking more amused than concerned. He patiently listened to Karen's highly dramatized account of being assaulted by a stampede of savage beasts, while I calmly explained that her crew had trespassed on private property, directly into a fenced pasture containing large livestock, despite numerous warning signs. Officer Miller, after inspecting the still intact, though slightly bent where Karen had tried to climb it, fence and the very obvious, "No trespassing," signs, simply sighed. He reminded Karen, quite gently, that entering private property without permission was illegal, and that encountering farm animals on a farm was to be expected. He suggested, with a barely suppressed smile, that perhaps next time she wanted to inspect property, she should make an appointment and stay on the right side of the fence. Karen, of course, was furious, threatening to sue everyone from me to the county council. But Officer Miller, bless his heart, just shrugged and told her she was welcome to try. He knew the law, and he knew our farm. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental after months of being hounded by Karen and her HOA. Despite this minor triumph, the incident only fueled Karen's vendetta. She saw the cattle incident not as a consequence of her trespassing, but as an act of defiance from me, a personal challenge. The letters from the HOA became even more frequent and aggressive. They cited new, even more ridiculous, violations, like the unapproved color of my tractor, it was a classic farm equipment green, and the excessive volume of crickets chirping at night. It was clear she was grasping at straws, desperate to find a way to punish us. We continued to consult our lawyer, who advised us to simply document everything and ignore the absurdities. "She's trying to provoke you," he explained. "Don't give her the satisfaction." We tried to maintain our routine, focusing on the farm, on the animals, and on the simple joys of rural life. My dad and I spent more time together, repairing fences, mending equipment, and tending to the new calves. He often reminded me that true strength wasn't about shouting the loudest or winning every argument, but about standing firm in your values and living with integrity. Some people, he'd say, are just determined to be unhappy, no matter what. Don't let their unhappiness become yours. His words were a constant anchor in the turbulent sea of Karen's relentless harassment. The Harmony Heights residents, however, were not a monolithic entity. While Karen had her loyal followers, a quiet shift was beginning to occur among some of the other homeowners. The news of Karen's trespassing incident, filtered through the town's grapevine and exaggerated in various ways, had reached their ears. Some, particularly those who had moved to Willow Creek seeking a quieter, more community-oriented lifestyle, began to question Karen's extreme tactics. They saw her as increasingly unreasonable, her demands bordering on the absurd. A few brave souls even approached us directly, offering hesitant apologies for Karen's behavior and expressing admiration for our perseverance. One new neighbor, a kind woman named Sarah who had recently moved from the city with her 2 young children, even brought us a pie, a gesture of unexpected kindness. She confessed that her kids loved watching our cows from their backyard and that Karen's constant complaints about the farm felt mean-spirited and unnecessary. These small acts of solidarity, these quiet gestures of empathy, meant the world to us. They were like tiny sparks of light in the growing shadow of Karen's animosity. They reminded us that not everyone in Harmony Heights was against us, and that there were indeed good people who appreciated the balance between nature and community. This budding support, however, was not enough to deter Karen. She doubled down on her efforts to make our lives miserable. Her next move was to organize what she called a Community Awareness Day in Harmony Heights, which was essentially a thinly veiled smear campaign against our farm. She distributed flyers filled with exaggerated claims about noise pollution, environmental hazards. Our farm was actually incredibly environmentally friendly, with sustainable practices at its core, and the ever-present aesthetic blight of our property. She invited local council members and even a reporter from the regional newspaper, hoping to garner negative press and public support for her cause. We learned about the event through Sarah, who discreetly sent us a copy of the flyer. My dad considered ignoring it, but I argued that we couldn't let Karen control the narrative. We need to show them the truth, I insisted. We need to show them that our farm isn't a problem, it's a part of this community. So, on the day of Karen's Community Awareness Day, instead of hiding, we showed up. Not in an aggressive way, but quietly, respectfully. We brought a small basket of fresh eggs and some homemade jam, offering them to anyone who would listen. We answered questions calmly and honestly, inviting people to visit our farm and see for themselves. My dad spoke eloquently about the history of the farm, the importance of local agriculture, and our commitment to being good neighbors. He talked about the values of patience and understanding, even when faced with adversity. It was a stark contrast to Karen's shrill complaints and agitated demeanor. Many people were surprised. They had only heard Karen's side of the story, painted with broad strokes of negativity. Seeing us, calm and reasonable, and hearing our genuine passion for our work, began to chip away at the narrative Karen had so carefully constructed. The reporter, initially drawn by the promise of a heated neighborhood dispute, seemed genuinely intrigued by our perspective and spent more time interviewing us than he did Karen. It felt like another small victory, a testament to the power of truth and kindness. But Karen, ever relentless, saw our presence at her event as a direct challenge, a public humiliation. Her face, already flushed with anger, turned a shade of deep crimson. She felt her control slipping, her carefully crafted image of the aggrieved homeowner being undermined by our simple honesty. She cornered my dad after the event, her voice low and menacing. "You think you're so clever, don't you, Mr. Peterson?" she hissed, her eyes blazing. "You think you can just charm your way out of this? Well, I promise you, this is far from over. I will not rest until your rural establishment is brought up to code, or better yet, gone entirely." My dad, ever composed, just looked at her with a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Ms. Williams," he said gently, "we're just trying to live our lives and run our farm. We've tried to be good neighbors. We truly hope you'll reconsider your approach." She scoffed, turning on her heel and marching away, leaving a lingering sense of unease. Her words, though spoken quietly, carried a chilling weight. We knew she wouldn't give up. The next few weeks were tense. We kept our guard up, knowing that Karen was likely plotting her next move. We assumed it would be another legal maneuver, another string of ridiculous letters, or perhaps another attempt to rally her dwindling supporters. We fortified our security further, checking locks multiple times a day and making sure our cameras were fully operational. We also made sure to spend extra time with our cattle, ensuring they were calm and well exercised, in case Karen tried something disruptive again. Then came the night of the big storm. A massive thunderstorm rolled in, unleashing torrents of rain and violent winds that whipped through Willow Creek. The power flickered and died, plunging the entire area into darkness. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing at the trees and rattling the windows of our farmhouse. It was a truly terrifying night, one of the worst storms in years. My dad and I spent hours checking on the animals, making sure they were safe and secure in the barn, trying to keep them calm amidst the crashing thunder and blinding flashes of lightning. Around midnight, during a brief lull in the storm, just as the rain seemed to ease for a moment, I heard a faint, but distinct, metallic clang from the direction of our main gate. It was a sound that sent a jolt of ice through my veins. It was the unmistakable sound of something hitting metal, a sound that shouldn't have been there, especially not in the dead of night, in the middle of a storm. My mind immediately went to Karen. Had she, in her twisted determination, chosen this moment, this chaotic, dark night, to try something even more audacious? My heart pounded in my chest. I grabbed a flashlight and motioned to my dad. We looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between us. This could not be good. We knew, with a terrible certainty, that the peace of the farm was once again under threat, and this time, the stakes felt even higher. We crept towards the gate, the beam of my flashlight cutting a narrow path through the oppressive darkness and the lingering mist from the storm. What we found next made our blood run cold. The metallic clang we heard during the storm was the sound of our main gate, not just open, but deliberately unhinged and dragged off its posts. It lay twisted on the muddy ground, a gaping maw leading directly into our cattle pasture. The sheer force required to do that, especially in the dark and the driving rain, was chilling. My dad and I exchanged a horrified look, the beam of my flashlight dancing over the destruction. This wasn't accidental, this was malicious. This was Karen. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and cold fury. She had crossed a line, a very dangerous line. We had no idea what her intention was. Had she hoped the cattle would wander off into the dark, perhaps into Harmony Heights, causing chaos and giving her more ammunition against us? Or was it something even worse? The thought sent shivers down my spine. We immediately set about trying to secure the area, but in the pitch black and the slick mud, it was nearly impossible to rehang the heavy gate. We did our best to fashion a temporary barrier with some fallen branches and old fencing wire, enough to hopefully deter any wandering animals for the rest of the night. It was a flimsy solution, but it was all we could manage. We then spent the rest of the night on high alert, taking turns patrolling the perimeter, our sleep shattered by anxiety. The storm eventually subsided, leaving behind a trail of downed branches, soggy ground, and a lingering sense of violation. The next morning, under the pale light of dawn, the full extent of the damage was clear. Not only was the gate off its hinges, but several sections of the perimeter fence had also been cut, not by falling branches, but by deliberate, clean snips. This was no act of nature, this was sabotage. My dad, usually the calmest person I knew, clenched his jaw, his eyes reflecting a deep anger I rarely saw. "She really means business, doesn't she?" he muttered, more to himself than to me. We called Officer Miller again. He arrived, looked at the destroyed gate and cut fences, and his good-natured demeanor shifted to a serious frown. This was no longer a simple trespassing issue. This was criminal damage. He took photos, made notes, and assured us he would investigate thoroughly. He promised to increase patrols in the area, but we both knew that catching someone in the act, especially in the dead of night, was incredibly difficult. The lack of direct evidence, no witnesses, no clear footprints besides ours and the animals, meant it would be hard to pin it definitively on Karen, even though we both felt certain it was her doing. The whole thing felt frustratingly out of our control. The incident put us on high alert. We immediately invested in more robust security measures, industrial-strength locks for all gates, reinforced fencing, and more motion-activated cameras with night vision. We also installed floodlights around the main pasture, ensuring that any future nocturnal visitors would be brightly illuminated. It was an expensive and time-consuming undertaking, but the peace of mind it offered was invaluable. We couldn't afford to let our guard down again. We needed to protect our home, our livelihood, and our animals. Life on the farm resumed, but with an underlying current of tension. Every unfamiliar car that drove past, every unexpected noise, sent a jolt of anxiety through us. We found ourselves constantly checking the fences, scanning the fields, always on the lookout. It was exhausting, living with that perpetual sense of unease. My dad tried to keep our spirits up, reminding me that even in the face of such animosity, we had to hold on to our kindness and our principles. If we let her bitterness infect us, he reasoned, then she's truly won. The Harmony Heights HOA, however, seemed to have taken a brief pause in their direct attacks. Perhaps the incident with the bulls and the stern talk from Officer Miller had given Karen pause, or maybe she was just regrouping, planning her next, more insidious move. The quiet was almost more unsettling than the constant barrage of letters. It felt like the calm before another storm. We remained wary, knowing that Karen was likely concocting something. During this period of uneasy quiet, we found solace in the simple routines of farm life. The birth of new calves, their wobbly legs and curious snorts, brought immense joy. We spent hours teaching them to drink from bottles, their soft muzzles nudging our hands. The planting season arrived, and the act of tilling the soil, sowing seeds, and watching new life sprout from the earth felt profoundly grounding. It was a powerful reminder that despite the human drama unfolding around us, life on the farm continued its ancient, comforting cycle. We found strength in the resilience of nature and the unwavering loyalty of our animals. Sarah, our kind neighbor from Harmony Heights, became a more frequent visitor. She'd bring her children, a bright-eyed boy named Sam and a quiet girl named Lily, to watch us milk the cows or collect eggs. They were fascinated by farm life, their innocence a stark contrast to the adult animosity that had poisoned the air. Sarah confessed that many residents were growing tired of Karen's relentless crusade against us. "She's just so aggressive," Sarah confided one afternoon, as her children giggled while feeding scraps to our chickens. "Most people moved here for peace and quiet, not constant neighborhood feuds." Her words were encouraging. It seemed Karen's increasingly extreme behavior was backfiring, even among some of her previous supporters. Public opinion in Harmony Heights was slowly, but steadily, shifting. People were starting to see her for what she was, a bully driven by an irrational need for control. The local newspaper, the one whose reporter had interviewed us during Karen's Awareness Day, even published a small article that, while not explicitly taking sides, presented a balanced view of the farm-suburb dynamic, subtly highlighting the benefits of local agriculture and implying that coexistence was possible. It was a subtle win, but a significant one. It meant the narrative wasn't entirely in Karen's hands anymore. However, this shift in sentiment did not escape Karen's notice. She seemed to become even more enraged by her diminishing influence. We heard rumors, through the neighborhood grapevine, that she was growing increasingly desperate, her tactics becoming more erratic. She reportedly yelled at a young couple for having too many gnomes in their garden and tried to fine another family for the excessive cheerfulness of their porch swing. Her own HOA board members, once her staunch allies, began to distance themselves, weary of her increasingly bizarre demands and the constant drama she created. It was clear she was losing control, and that made her even more dangerous. One sunny afternoon, I was fixing a broken fence post near the boundary line with Harmony Heights, enjoying the peaceful hum of the countryside. My dad was in town picking up supplies. Suddenly, a familiar white SUV screeched to a halt on the road, kicking up a cloud of dust. It was Karen, her face a mask of rage. She got out of her car, slamming the door, and marched directly towards me, her eyes blazing. She wasn't carrying a clipboard this time, but a small, heavy-looking bag. "You think you've won, don't you?" she shrieked, her voice shrill and laced with venom. "You think you can just ignore the rules, make a mockery of our community, and get away with it?" I straightened up, leaning on my shovel, trying to remain calm. "Ms. Williams, I'm just trying to fix a fence. We're not making a mockery of anything." "Oh, you will be," she snarled, a twisted smile spreading across her face. "You will regret ever crossing me, Mr. Peterson. This farm, your precious farm, is about to face its biggest challenge yet." With that, she reached into her bag and pulled something out. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a letter, or a camera, or a measuring tape. It was a large, industrial-sized bag of weed killer. My eyes widened in horror. She then, with a disturbing glint in her eye, began to pour the highly toxic liquid along the fence line, directly onto the grass and wildflowers that grew there, leading towards our main pasture. It was a chilling, deliberate act of environmental vandalism, aimed directly at the health of our land and potentially, our animals. I stared, paralyzed for a moment by the sheer audacity and malice of her action. This wasn't just about property lines or aesthetics anymore. This was a direct threat to our farm, to the very ecosystem we had nurtured for generations. My mind raced, trying to comprehend the potential damage, the danger to the cattle if they ingested it. Before I could even react, before I could yell or stop her, she dumped the entire contents of the bag, a thick, green liquid, onto the earth, then dropped the empty bag and turned to face me, a look of triumph, cold and unhinged, etched on her face. "Consider that a taste of what's to come," she hissed, her eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. She then spun on her heel and drove away, leaving behind the acrid smell of chemicals and a terrifying silence. I stood there, utterly stunned, staring at the rapidly soaking patch of poisoned earth, my heart sinking with a new, terrifying dread. This was no longer just a nuisance, this was an attack. The sight of Karen pouring the weed killer, the acrid smell already stinging my nostrils, sent a cold wave of dread through me. This was a whole new level of malice. My mind reeled, grappling with the immediate danger to my animals and the long-term damage to the land. I immediately grabbed my phone and called my dad, my voice tight with urgency. He listened, his silence on the other end speaking volumes. He told me to stay put and that he was already on his way back, cutting his errands short. The moment he arrived, his face grim, we sprang into action. We knew we had to act fast. We couldn't let the poison seep deeper into the soil or spread further. Our first priority was to prevent the cattle from grazing anywhere near that section of the fence. We quickly erected temporary electric fencing around the contaminated area, clearly marking it with bright orange flags as a hazard zone. The Longhorns, sensing our urgency, watched us with their calm, curious eyes, unaware of the silent threat that now lay so close. Next, we began the laborious process of containment and removal. We carefully dug up the poisoned topsoil, bagging it in thick, heavy-duty plastic to prevent any leakage. It was back-breaking work, but we worked with a frantic intensity, driven by the fear of contamination. The smell of the chemicals lingered, a constant, unpleasant reminder of Karen's destructive act. My dad, ever the pragmatist, immediately called a hazardous waste disposal company to ensure the contaminated soil was handled safely and legally. This was an unexpected and significant expense, but we knew it was absolutely necessary. We also contacted Officer Miller again, explaining what had happened. He listened gravely, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a stern expression. "This is serious, Alex," he said, shaking his head. "Environmental damage, potential harm to livestock, this is no longer just a neighborly dispute." He came out to the farm, documented the poisoned area, and took samples of the contaminated soil for testing. He assured us that he would escalate the investigation and consult with the district attorney. The gravity in his voice was clear. Karen had crossed a line that could have serious legal repercussions for her. It was a relief to know that the authorities were finally taking the situation with the seriousness it deserved. The days following the poisoning incident were filled with anxiety. We constantly monitored our cattle for any signs of illness, checking their behavior, their appetites, their overall health. Every sniffle, every cough, sent a jolt of fear through us. Thankfully, because we had acted so quickly, none of them showed any symptoms. It was a testament to our immediate response and the protective measures we had in place. The cost of the cleanup, the added security, and the constant vigilance weighed heavily on us, both financially and emotionally. But we refused to be defeated. This was our farm, our heritage, and we would protect it at all costs. News of Karen's latest act spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. Unlike the ambiguous stories about the bull incident, there was no denying the deliberate act of poisoning. Officer Miller's official investigation, though quiet, was noted. Even within Harmony Heights, the incident caused a massive uproar. Many residents, previously swayed by Karen's charisma or simply wanting to avoid conflict, were now openly disgusted. Sarah, our kind neighbor, told us that the Harmony Heights HOA board held an emergency meeting, and this time, Karen's allies were nowhere to be found. Her extreme behavior, culminating in an act of environmental vandalism, had alienated even her staunchest supporters. Whispers of her being removed from her position as head of the beautification committee, and even from the HOA board entirely began to circulate. It felt like the tide was finally turning. People were tired of the drama, the negativity, and the outright malice. They had moved to Willow Creek for peace, and Karen was destroying it. Amidst this turmoil, an unexpected wave of support began to pour in from the wider community. Local farmers, many of whom we had known for years, offered help with the cleanup, lending equipment and their invaluable expertise. Neighbors, even those we barely knew, dropped off food, offered words of encouragement, and simply showed up to offer a helping hand. The small article in the local newspaper, which had initially been balanced, was followed by a more direct editorial condemning acts of environmental terrorism and praising the resilience of local farmers. The community rallied around us, a powerful testament to the bonds that formed when people faced a common threat. This outpouring of solidarity was incredibly moving. It reminded us that for every Karen, there were dozens, even hundreds, of good, kind-hearted people who valued community, decency, and respect. It was a profound lesson in the power of collective empathy, proving that when true malice was revealed, good people would stand up against it. One afternoon, as my dad and I were working to replace the damaged fence sections, a small group of Harmony Heights residents approached our property. They weren't from the HOA, these were just ordinary people, families who had chosen to live near our farm. Among them was Sarah, holding a casserole dish, and two other women I recognized from the grocery store. They looked hesitant, almost apologetic. "Mr. Peterson, Alex," Sarah began, her voice soft but firm, "we just wanted to say. We are so deeply sorry for what Karen did. It's truly appalling. We want you to know that not all of us agree with her, and many of us are actively trying to make things right." Another woman, named Debbie, stepped forward. "We've started a petition to have her removed from the HOA board," she explained, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "And we're working with the board to establish clear guidelines for interacting with neighboring properties, especially farms. We want to be good neighbors." My dad's eyes softened. He nodded slowly, a genuine smile replacing the tension that had been etched on his face for weeks. "That means a lot to us," he said, his voice a little hoarse with emotion. "It truly does." They stayed for a while, chatting, asking questions about farm life, and offering to help with odd jobs around the farm. Their sincerity was palpable, a stark contrast to Karen's manufactured outrage. It was a powerful moment of reconciliation, a sign that genuine connection and understanding could blossom even after so much conflict. This interaction, more than any legal victory, felt like a true turning point. It showed that kindness, empathy, and open communication were ultimately more powerful than bitterness and resentment. However, the peace was short-lived. Just as we began to feel a sense of relief, just as the community support seemed to solidify, a new, more unsettling development occurred. We received a notice from the local zoning board. It wasn't from Karen or the HOA directly, but it was clearly instigated by someone with influence. The notice stated that a formal complaint had been filed, alleging that our farm was in violation of a long-dormant, obscure zoning ordinance regarding excessive agricultural structures and commercial noise levels in proximity to residential areas. The complaint demanded a full audit of our farm structures and operations, with a threat of significant fines and even potential forced modifications if we were found to be non-compliant. My dad and I stared at the official document, our hearts sinking. This was a direct, calculated attack, bypassing the HOA entirely and going straight to a governmental authority. It was more sophisticated, more insidious than anything Karen had tried before. It meant she had found someone with connections, someone willing to use bureaucratic channels to inflict damage. This was no longer just a neighbor acting out. This was a well-planned assault designed to hit us where it hurt most, our ability to operate the farm itself. The thought that someone, perhaps Karen or someone she influenced, was pulling strings behind the scenes, using obscure laws to undermine our very existence, was truly terrifying. We knew we were in for the fight of our lives, a battle not just for our property, but for the fundamental right to continue our way of life. The calm we had just started to feel was shattered, replaced by a chilling uncertainty about the future of our family farm. The zoning board notice hit us like a physical blow. It wasn't Karen's usual ranting, this was an official document, sterile and intimidating, threatening the very core of our existence. Excessive agricultural structures, and commercial noise levels, these phrases were designed to make our farm sound like an industrial menace, not a living, breathing part of the landscape. It was a clear escalation, a move orchestrated by someone who understood how to manipulate the bureaucratic system. This wasn't just about fines, it was about forcing us to fundamentally alter or even shut down parts of our farm. The chilling thought that someone was working behind the scenes, pulling strings to destroy our livelihood, filled us with a cold dread. My dad, usually so resilient, looked visibly shaken. "This is a new kind of fight, Alex," he murmured, tracing the words on the notice with a trembling finger. "They're trying to legislate us out of existence." We immediately scheduled an emergency meeting with our lawyer, Mr. Henderson. He looked at the notice with a grim expression. "This is tricky," he admitted. "These old zoning laws can be vague, and if someone's pushing hard enough, they can be used as a weapon." He explained that fighting the zoning board would be a lengthy, expensive, and emotionally draining process. It would involve public hearings, expert testimonies, and a deep dive into decades-old regulations. The odds felt stacked against us. Despite the daunting challenge, we knew we couldn't back down. This wasn't just about our farm anymore, it was about defending a way of life, a legacy, and the principle that a working farm could coexist with a growing community. We started gathering documentation, old permits, property deeds, historical records, and photographs proving the continuous operation of our farm for generations. We consulted with agricultural experts and environmentalists who could testify to our sustainable practices and the minimal impact of our operations. It was a crash course in legal jargon and bureaucratic procedures, a far cry from the rhythms of planting and harvesting. The pressure was immense. Every phone call from the zoning board felt like an interrogation. Every form we had to fill out was a reminder of the sword hanging over our heads. Sleep became elusive, replaced by restless nights filled with worry. We watched our savings dwindle, pouring money into legal fees and expert consultations. It was an isolating battle, even with the community's support. Most people understood the emotional toll, but few could truly grasp the complexities of fighting a government entity. However, even amidst this darkest period, sparks of hope emerged. Sarah, our compassionate neighbor from Harmony Heights, became an unexpected ally. She wasn't just bringing pies anymore, she was actively campaigning for us within her community. She organized a grassroots effort, collecting signatures from Harmony Heights residents who supported our farm. Many of these were the same people who had initially been swayed by Karen but had grown disillusioned with her extremism. They saw the zoning complaint for what it was, an unfair attack on a good, honest family. Sarah's petition quickly gained traction, demonstrating that a significant portion of the new community did want us there, and that they valued the unique character our farm brought to the area. This growing support wasn't lost on the zoning board. While they couldn't ignore an official complaint, the increasing number of letters and calls from concerned citizens in Harmony Heights, advocating for our farm, began to create a counternarrative. It showed them that this wasn't a clear-cut case of a nuisance farm, but a complex issue with strong community division. The local newspaper also continued its coverage, now focusing on the legal battle and the community's response, framing it as a David versus Goliath story that captured the public's imagination. We were no longer just the farmers in Karen's narrative, we were a symbol of resilience, fighting for our rights. As the date for the zoning board hearing drew closer, the tension became almost unbearable. My dad and I practiced our testimonies, trying to simplify complex farming practices into easily understandable language. We prepared visual aids, including maps and photos, to illustrate how our farm had coexisted peacefully with the surrounding land for decades. We focused on presenting ourselves as reasonable, responsible landowners, dedicated to our land and our animals. Then, just days before the hearing, another incident occurred, one that, while less dramatic than the bull chase, was deeply unsettling because of its calculated nature. We had just finished a long day of preparing for the hearing, feeling utterly drained. As dusk settled, I walked out to the chicken coop to gather the last of the eggs. Everything seemed quiet, peaceful. But when I reached the coop, something felt off. The latch, which I always secured tightly, was slightly ajar. My stomach churned with unease. I pushed the door open cautiously, and that's when I saw it. One of our youngest chickens, a beautiful Rhode Island red hen named Rosie, was missing. My heart sank. Rosie was a favorite, a vibrant, friendly bird. But it wasn't just Rosie. Several other chickens were clearly agitated, clucking nervously and huddled together in a corner, their feathers ruffled. It looked like someone had been in there, deliberately. This wasn't a predator. A fox or a coyote would have left a mess, feathers everywhere. This was too clean, too precise. It felt personal. A small, intricately folded piece of paper lay on the straw-covered floor, almost hidden. I picked it up, my hands trembling. On it, in neat, almost elegant handwriting, was a single, chilling message, just a reminder of what else you have to lose. There was no signature, but I knew, with a terrible certainty, who it was from. Karen. The act itself wasn't about the chickens. It was about psychological warfare, a cruel reminder that she could reach into the most vulnerable parts of our farm, that nothing was truly safe. It was a deeply personal attack, designed to instill fear and rattle us just before the crucial hearing. The thought that she was still actively trying to undermine us, even after everything, sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just about winning an argument for her, it was about breaking us. It was an extreme event, one that cut deeper than any previous act of vandalism or legal maneuvering, because it was a direct threat to the living beings we cared for so deeply. The missing chicken and that chilling note left me shaken to my core. It was a direct, personal assault, designed to inject fear and instability right before the biggest fight of our lives. My dad, when I showed him the note, his face grim, simply squeezed my shoulder. "She's desperate, son," he said, his voice low. "This means she's losing. We just have to hold strong." His words were meant to reassure, but the lingering image of Rosie, our little hen, and the malice of that note, kept a cold knot of dread in my stomach. We reported it to Officer Miller, who added it to the growing file on Karen, though without direct proof, it remained circumstantial. The day of the zoning board hearing dawned, overcast and heavy. My dad and I arrived at the county building with Mr. Henderson, our lawyer, carrying boxes of documents and feeling the weight of generations of farming on our shoulders. The hearing room was packed, a sea of faces from both Willow Creek and Harmony Heights. Karen was there, of course, seated at a table across from us, flanked by her own lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. She shot us a triumphant, venomous glare, as if convinced she had already won. The hearing began, a slow, methodical process of presenting arguments and evidence. Karen's lawyer painted a picture of our farm as an outdated, noisy, and smelly blight on the modern suburban landscape, citing obscure regulations and exaggerating every complaint. He called witnesses from Harmony Heights who, while not as extreme as Karen, repeated grievances about noise and odors, clearly coached on what to say. It was frustrating to listen to the distortions, to hear our home and our livelihood being slandered. When it was our turn, Mr. Henderson, with his calm, steady voice, presented our case. He highlighted our farm's long history, its economic contributions to the community, and our commitment to sustainable practices. He showed photographs of our well-maintained property, our healthy animals, and the natural beauty of the land. My dad spoke passionately about his family's legacy, about the importance of fresh, local food, and about our efforts to be good neighbors. He spoke about empathy and understanding, even when faced with adversity, a clear jab at Karen without ever naming her directly. Then it was my turn. I spoke about the specific steps we had taken to address concerns, about the increased security after the gate incident, and about the extensive cleanup after the weed killer attack. I looked directly at the zoning board members, my voice clear and firm. We are not asking for special treatment, I concluded. We are simply asking for the right to continue a way of life that has been here long before Harmony Heights. We believe in coexistence, in finding common ground. Our farm is not a nuisance, it is a vital part of this community, and we are committed to being responsible stewards of the land. The room was silent for a moment. Then, a ripple of quiet applause broke out from the Willow Creek residents and some of the Harmony Heights contingent, including Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. Karen's face was a mask of furious disbelief. She had clearly expected us to crumble. Just as the board was about to move to public comments, a commotion erupted at the back of the room. Two men in suits, holding official-looking folders, walked purposefully towards Karen's table. They identified themselves as investigators from the state's Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. The room went completely silent. My heart pounded. What was happening? The EPA agents, with serious expressions, informed Karen and her lawyer that a formal investigation had been launched into the illegal disposal of hazardous materials and potential environmental contamination. They mentioned receiving anonymous tips, and then, to our shock, they held up a Ziploc bag containing the very weed killer bag that Karen had abandoned on our property, along with vials of the contaminated soil samples Officer Miller had collected. Karen's face, already pale with anger, drained to an ashen white. Her lawyer looked absolutely stunned. Furthermore, one of the agents continued, his voice cutting through the silence, "We have obtained security camera footage from a nearby property, showing Ms. Williams discarding a similar container of chemicals near the Peterson farm on the date in question." A collective gasp swept through the room. Karen jumped up, her chair scraping loudly. "This is outrageous. A lie. I've been framed." She shrieked, her composure utterly shattered. Her voice was high-pitched and hysterical, a stark contrast to her previous controlled aggression. The EPA agents, unmoved, continued. "We also have reason to believe Ms. Williams has been involved in other acts of harassment and intimidation against the Peterson family, including destruction of private property." They looked directly at the zoning board members. "We advise this board to consider the broader context of these complaints, which appear to be driven by personal vendetta rather than legitimate concerns." The zoning board members, who had looked tired and bored moments before, were now wide-eyed and alert. This was an entirely new, incredibly serious development. Karen's lawyer, clearly caught off guard, tried to whisper furiously to her, but she was beyond reasoning. She was red-faced, trembling, and completely unhinged. She began to yell at the EPA agents, then at the zoning board, accusing everyone of conspiracy. "You can't do this," she screamed, her voice echoing through the stunned room. "This farm is a menace. They let their wild animals run free. They steal chickens. They poison people with their smells." Suddenly, a calm voice cut through Karen's escalating hysteria. It was Sarah. She stood up from the audience, her hands clasped in front of her. "A mess. Williams," she said, her voice clear and strong, "you are accusing the Petersons of taking chickens, but I can tell you, firsthand, that our community has been receiving anonymous deliveries of fresh eggs for weeks now. And on each delivery, there's been a note, saying they're from Rosie." My jaw dropped. My dad looked at me, a flicker of surprise and dawning understanding in his eyes. Sarah continued, her voice gaining confidence. "And many of us also know that you, Ms. Williams, have been selling farm-fresh eggs to other Harmony Heights residents for months, claiming they were from a local, organic source. Perhaps you can explain where these local, organic eggs truly came from, considering you don't own any chickens? The silence in the room was deafening. Every eye turned to Karen. The implications were clear. Not only had she likely stolen our chicken, but she had then profited from it, selling our stolen goods under false pretenses. This was beyond harassment, this was theft and fraud. Karen, who had been ranting moments before, suddenly froze, her face a picture of pure, unadulterated horror. She had been caught, completely exposed, not just for her malice, but for her hypocrisy and criminal behavior. The carefully constructed facade of the aggrieved homeowner shattered completely. The triumph in her eyes earlier was replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. She looked around the room, desperate, cornered. The zoning board members exchanged shocked glances. Her lawyer buried his face in his hands. As the EPA agents and Officer Miller began to quietly move towards Karen, intending to formally detain her, she made one last, desperate attempt at defiance. With a guttural cry of rage and humiliation, she grabbed a glass of water from the table and hurled it across the room, missing the EPA agent but splashing loudly against the wall. Then, in a final, pathetic act of desperation, she overturned her chair and bolted for the exit, pushing past startled spectators, her face contorted with a mixture of fear and fury. Two uniformed officers, who had just entered the room at the back, quickly intercepted her. Her screams echoed through the hallway as they led her away, a wild, chaotic ending to a long, arduous battle. The zoning board hearing, now devoid of its instigator, was quickly adjourned. The chairman, visibly shaken but determined, announced that all complaints against the Peterson farm were being dismissed, effective immediately, pending a full review in light of the new, overwhelming evidence of malicious intent and criminal behavior from the complainant. Justice, swift and unexpected, had finally arrived. My dad and I looked at each other, relief washing over us in a powerful wave. It was over. The farm was safe. And the community, finally seeing the truth, was united, standing with us against the darkness that had tried to consume us.